What's going on, everybody? It's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and we're gonna do something a little bit different tonight. Now, I said tonight, but when I actually release this video is a whole other story. But right now, it's late. It's nearly 4 a.m. I'm still awake for some reason. And usually in situations like this, when I'm bored and don't really feel like playing a game in the middle of the night, I get nostalgic. I tend to muse a little bit. It happens, I'm sure you've all been there, but it's a very different vibe and a very different mindset and a very different mood even I have. Now, because of that, we're probably going to be looking at a little bit of a maybe rambly video, a little bit of a less coherent video than usual, or maybe even a little bit more coherent than usual, because this one is just kind of raw, if you will. It is what it is, but I don't know. There's probably going to be very little to possibly even no editing on this. There might even be some mistakes. There might even be some fuck-ups. There might even be one or two protracted silences as I try to find a word I'm using, or try to find a term, an adjective to describe what I'm feeling, or what I'm seeing, or thinking about. So, what are we talking about in this video? Well, I want to harken back to the days of yore that some of you may or may not remember, depending on how old you are. I'd say probably if you're in your mid-20s. Let me see, it's 2018 right now. Yeah, I'd say if you're in your mid-20s or younger, you're probably too actually young to know what's going on here. But I'd say if you're probably 25 or above, depending on your region, of course, and where you live and whatnot, it's going to be different for everyone and different for every region. But yeah, you might be too old. You might be, well, you can't really be too old. You might be too young to know what I'm talking about here. But I'm sure some of you guys out there are my age or possibly older, and you know. But I'm looking at something that has almost completely disappeared at this point. Now, there'll be one or two very, very, very extenuating, that's the word I'm looking for, circumstances where this kind of stuff is still prevalent and is still the norm and does still exist. I'll give an example of that now in a minute. But something I really miss, to an extent, obviously there's a convenience aspect in the modern era and whatnot, and that's a whole other kettle of fish that we want to talk about. But I really, really miss the rental experience. Now, what I mean by the rental experience is I don't just mean the idea of going somewhere and renting something. Technically, you do that when you think about it. Netflix essentially boils down to renting something, and that is, to an extent, the rental experience. You pay a subscription fee or whatever it is. It's really a subscription fee, but then on top of that, once you're done, you stop paying or whatever, and you lose access to that, to whatever it is. Granted, many people will keep Netflix for months, if not years on at a time, but you see my point. It's a very broad, and I suppose you could call it a more modernized and updated even version of rentals and rental experience. But I'm talking old school stuff. I'm talking about going to a video store, to a rental store. That's right, guys, video store. That's crazy, I know, VHS. But I'm talking about going to one of them. I'm talking about spending some time in a store, browsing the shelves, trying to find something that tickles your fancy. And of course, this goes for multiple different sizes. As we already said, this goes for VHS, for videos, for films, DVDs, TV shows, whatever it is. Granted, they didn't really rent out TV shows back then. Not many places did, even on DVD I could think of. But it also went for games too. There was places around here where you could rent not only video, not only DVD, not only games, but there were even a couple of places where you could actually straight up rent consoles. That's right, I know, might seem like a crazy thing. Most places would charge, obviously it was more expensive to rent a console, and some places required a deposit as well, in case you broke it or something happened with it or whatever. You'd get the deposit back, of course, but you wouldn't get the rental fee back. Let me give you a quick example off the top of my head. There was a place around here that used to rent Nintendo 64s. Obviously, they rented Super Nintendos and Sega Mega Drives and PlayStations and whatnot. But they used to rent Nintendo 64s, and this is the only one off the top of my head that I remember price-wise. Is before the euro, we used to use the pound, and the Irish pound. and you would have to put down a deposit of £50, and I think it was a £20 rental fee. The £20 would be the fee to actually rent it, and you got your €50 back when you brought it back, and it was all determined to be working, and you didn't break it or obviously fuck it up or run off with it. But that was a whole other thing, and it was a whole other experience. And of course, nowadays we know that by and large, for 99% of the world, that the rental experience is gone. Now, of course, there is in some parts of the world, I think it's really only America, possibly Canada. There might be other places that I don't know about that also have I think it's called a GameFly service, where places will post you out a game on release day or whenever they have it in stock or whatever it is, and you would play it for whatever amount of time and then send it back, like an actual physical copy. You'd post it back to them. And I know that's something that's probably very strange nowadays, at least anyway. But you also got to remember things like Blockbuster. Now, I use Blockbuster as the example because, granted, we didn't have Blockbuster here. I know a lot of you guys are probably American or Canadian or whatever, or maybe even some places in Europe or some places in all over the world, because I have followers from basically every different continent at this point, and I don't know the ins and outs of everyone's situation, unfortunately. So Blockbuster is the one that really everyone knows because it's the prolific one, the US one. And as far as I know, there's only one remaining Blockbuster in the entire United States. And that one is somewhere in, I was going to say somewhere in Canada. That would have been a fuck up and a half. But somewhere in Alaska. Because apparently up there, the internet is so bad and the infrastructure and everything is so bad. Not just the digital infrastructure, but the actual physical live infrastructure because of where they are. There's actually a live, thriving Blockbuster. Simply because with the lack of quality internet and how awkward it is to get new films up and back and all that stuff, as well as everything else in the world around there, it's actually just easier to use actual DVDs and whatnot to rent. It's crazy, I know, it's madness. Like, let me give you a perfect example. Over the last, I don't know, we'll go 15 to 20 years, we used to have one big chain of what do we call it, video rental places. Obviously, they rented games and whatnot too, and there was always such a great experience with it because you would have these smaller stores as well, which would be trying to offer something different to compete with it. And I know when I was a kid, I used to absolutely love it every Friday because we'd have school Monday to Friday. Obviously, everyone as a kid looked forward to the weekend. And every Friday afternoon or Friday evening, whatever you want to call it, after school, not directly after school, but at some point that night, I would go down to the place. We called it was an independent one called Video Box. I know, strange name. But we'd go down there, me and my mother, and every Friday I would get to rent a console. Now, this was obviously before I had a console. I didn't have a Super Nintendo or a Sega Mega Drive at the time. But we'd go down there, and one week I'd rent a Super Nintendo, and then the next week I'd rent a Sega Mega Drive, and then the week after I'd rent a Super Nintendo, and the week after I'd rent a Sega Mega Drive. That's usually how it would go. Of course, if one of them was out, I'd just get the other, but because I think they only had one of each, so if someone had already rented the Super Nintendo, I'd just get the other one. Of course, this only took place over the course of about maybe 6 or 8 months, because then Christmas rolled around and, well, I got myself a Super Nintendo for Christmas. Funny enough, my Super Nintendo, which I still have, including all the original game, I would say games, but I think I only got the one game at Christmas. I have the box, I have pretty much everything for it. That's irrelevant though. But the point I'm thinking of is that the whole rental experience is now basically, I won't call it a lost art, but it's a lost experience to most people. Like I said at the start of this video, anyone who's probably 25 years old or younger, this experience doesn't exist for you. And granted, it may sound pedestrian, it may sound unneeded, it may sound unnecessary, it may sound cumbersome and a bit of a hassle, but this was a whole other thing back then. When the internet wasn't what it is and what we know it as today, streaming services basically didn't exist, or literally didn't exist back then, and there was no easy way to get films, there was no easy way to get digital anything, digital TV shows, digital anime, digital, obviously we said films, anything like that. There was no easy way to get it digitally, it was all very, very slow, very hard to come by, and chances are very low quality as well. Because this was a time when all that stuff, all those digital files and all, they had to download on 56k modems. They had to download on 512 KB DSL. So a lot of this stuff needed to be low quality because its delivery method was very, very, very slow. I say this as someone who downloaded some old school stuff back on 56k modems and 512 DSL. But anyway, that's why these things were a staple, essentially. And they've all kind of disappeared and conglomerated and then disappeared again over the last couple of years and whatnot. But let me give you some more examples. We had two main chains here over the last, I'd say, 10 years or so. Earlier on when I mentioned in the video, I said about 15 to 20 years, and back then we only had one, and a couple of obviously independent ones as well. But ever since then, I would say maybe about 15 to 10 years ago, another one opened up, and really that put all the other minor ones out of business. So you really had two separate ones. Funnily enough, in my town, they were actually located directly across the road from each other. But that's, neither here nor there. I just think it's kind of funny. It does give good choice, and to an extent, a good marketing plan, if you will, because when you walk to one of them, you have to almost basically go to the other. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. But when you look at it, and it put the other small ones out of business, these kind of survived for a while. But then at one point, one of them just went completely out of business. That was it. Literally what happened was the company executives just walked into the stores one morning and just said, close up, we're done, it's over. And that was it. And it just, all of them closed overnight just like that. And I still have some fond memories of that place. Granted, yeah, you could call it nostalgia, you could call it rose-tinted glasses, you could call it whatever. But when you think about it, what is nostalgia? What are the experiences from rose-tinted glasses when you're looking at something? It's your own personal experience. It's your own personal enjoyment. It's something which could be completely benign but unique to you, and may not recover, but may incorporate and bring back some sort of memory that you harken back to a time where something was good, something was bad, something you remember, whatever it was. Like, I remember, this is completely all over the place, I remember Resident Evil 2. Funny enough, Resident Evil 2 games release here on Fridays, 99% of the time. Granted, some EA games have changed that lately. I think they release on Thursdays here, and some big games, release on Tuesdays as well. But back in the day, games 100% released on Fridays. Now, I remember going into one of these local stores that I just mentioned on a Thursday night. Now, I don't know, what was I when Resident Evil 2 came out? I think I was like 10, maybe 12. No, I was probably about 10, maybe 10 or 11 years old. You know what, I'm kind of embarrassed that right now, because it's late, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm very tired. I can't remember off the top of my head what year Resident Evil 2 came out in. That's beside the point. But I just given you an example of this. So I went into one of these places on a Thursday night, and who took me in? My mother took me in that night because she was babysitting, and I had to go with her because I was apparently too young to take care of myself. Some people would argue I still am, or still am incapable of taking care of myself. But it is what it is. So my point is, we went in on the Thursday night, and lo and behold, there were probably 2 dozen, if not 3 or 4 dozen copies of Resident Evil 2 there, available for rent the night before launch. So I got one of these. I was like, I need to rent this game. Because she was letting me rent a game, because I would have been bored shitless if I was just sitting there in, like, babysitting land, So I just remember stuff like that. Playing Resident Evil 2 the night before it released. In fact, I finished it twice that night. Took the next day off school to go up and buy a copy. I had to go to Dublin to buy it with my mother because there was nowhere to buy games around here. But you see my point. It's memories like this. I have another one as well. I was going to say Sonic the Hedgehog for some reason, but it wasn't Sonic the Hedgehog. Metal Gear Solid. I remember playing the absolute shit out of a demo for Metal Gear Solid, because that's what you did back in the day. You played games on discs that came either with other games or that came with magazines. And they were demo discs. Madness. Absolutely madness, I know. Imagine a time when you didn't digitally download a demo before you try out a game. Anyway, that's beside the point as well. So I remember, again, going down one night. I can't remember why I was going down or whatever it was. And Metal Gear Solid was finally there. And there was one single copy, because it was release day. So there was one single copy left. And you better believe it, I rented the absolute shit out of it. Now here's a funny one for you as well. I'm sure many of you guys know out there, depending if you rented videos, depending if you rented DVDs, depending if you rented, I don't know, maybe NES games, SNES games, Mega Drive games, PS1 games, whatever it was, N64 games, whatever you rented, chances are they gave you a generic case. They probably gave you something like, we used Blockbusters as the example, so they probably gave you something like a Blockbuster case with special inserts for, I don't know, a Nintendo game, or special inserts for a DVD or a video or whatever it was. Of course, many places here did that too. So, when I was playing Metal Gear Solid, and I beat Revolver Ocelot for the first time, and you're talking with Baker, and you're talking with who is it, Campbell, and all that, and they tell you that Merrill's codec frequency is on the back of the CD case. Now, in the just before that exact conversation happens, you get the CD case from Baker. Baker. You get the CD case from Baker. And I spent so much time trying to examine that, because they gave me a generic, kind of blankish, branded case for the PlayStation 1 discs. So I had no way of looking at the back of the actual case. Absolute craziness, I know. And eventually I got it because it's very short. It's like, if I remember correctly, it's 0.12, which doesn't take that long to manually go through if you start at 00. So I got it pretty quickly anyway. But it's things like that you remember and that kind of live in with you. I mean, there's so many other ones I could go with. I could harken back to memories of Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I'll give you a quick refresher on that. The reason why that one sticks out is because obviously that was a big game, especially back in the day. When I had my own N64, well, I still technically do, but obviously I didn't have it at first, and yeah, you know what I mean. But I'd be renting that game the whole time, and I'd usually only get to rent it for one night or so, or maybe even 2 nights, but I'd never get to be able to finish it. And I remember this one time, I got right outside Ganon's castle at the very end. I was ready to go in. I had like 90% of the secrets and the hearts and the upgrades and all that in the entire game, and I had to save it outside the castle and bring it back. And I couldn't rent it again for a few more days. And lo and behold, there's only 3 save files in that game. I rented a couple of days later, and what happens? My save file is gone. I know. Absolute fucking kicker, am I right? But it's just things like that. And you've also got other memories. I'll give you one other very, very quick example before we kind of end this out, because, well, like I said, it's rambly and yeah, it is what it is. But I remember, because of where the rental stores are located in my town, or were. In fact, this one actually takes place in the opposite one, the one on the opposite side of the road. What we used to do is, this is my girlfriend at the time, she lived on completely one opposite end of the town. I live on the complete opposite end of the town from her. So we used to meet in one of these stores halfway, because it was halfway between our houses. So I remember I'd always use, well, most of the time, because women run late, am I right, guys? But most of the time, I would end up waiting around in the store a few minutes before she gets there. And there's always be this one game on the PS2. I know it was on more than the PS2, but they had a PS2 copy of it. There was always this one game that I'd always look at, and I'd always want to rent it, but I never, ever got around to it. I'll tell you what the game is now in a minute. Of course, I did get around to playing it multiple times, eventually down the line. But I'd always want to rent it. It looked like a really good kind of... What's the word I'm looking for? Not film-esque. Film-esque might actually be... cinematic. There you go. That's probably a better version of it. The box the front, the back, the description, and everything about the box and the images, all that stuff, it always seemed very cinematic and film noir. And I always wanted to play it, but I never got around to renting it. Eventually, a couple of years later, this probably would have been in the mid 2000s, so maybe like 4 or 5 years later, well, 5 or 6, depending on let's call it 4 to 6 years later, I eventually got around to getting the game digitally, because it was one of the few games offered digitally at the time on the successor to that. Yes, don't worry, I'm still going to tell you what the game is. But the reason why I actually did that is because the company or the studio that was actually behind the game, they said, okay, we're going to put out our next game. And I was really, really hyped for the next game. It looked really good. It was so interesting. And I knew it was from the same company, the same development studio. So I said, you know what? This game is coming out in, I think it's February of 2010. Before that, I'm going to play their previous game. So I downloaded the old school digital OG Xbox copy of Fahrenheit. That's Indigo Prophecy for you North American viewers out there. So, oh wow, I just realized I said this one will be a real quick example. Whoops, I get rambly, I warned you at the start. But hey, walks down memory lane are the best walks, am I right? So yeah, that game that I was talking about that I always look at while waiting on her was Fahrenheit. And that's still something I remember to this day. There's a few others in there too. I'm not going to bore you with all the details. But that's an experience that is obviously gone for 99% of everyone at this point. And it's an experience that some people will never live. There's other people out there who going to the video store, the rental store, whatever you call it, that was maybe a weekly ritual or an experience for their family. A friend of mine who would always do the same thing every Saturday night, no matter what it was. His family, there was him, his mother and father, his 3 brothers, and his sister. They would all go down to the video store every single Saturday night, and they would pick out 2 things, because there were so many of them. There would be 2 things for them to pick out, and usually it was the brothers, and usually it was my friend's 3 older brothers and his older sister that would all pick one thing to watch for them, and then the mother and father and him, because he was younger, would pick out something separate for them. So, and that was their experience. That was their ritual. They'd buy bagged popcorn, because yes, they sold bagged popcorn and all that stuff, and all the not condiments. What's the word I'm looking for? Confection. No, well, I suppose that would probably, but you know what I'm talking about. They'd sell all that stuff, and that was their weekly ritual. That was their. I'm sure many other people have something similar to that. And hell, I even arguably had one that I mentioned earlier in this video as well. Every Friday after school at some point, I'd go down with my mother and I'd be able to rent a console. It was my treat, essentially, for the weekend, if you will. And it's kind of sad in a way that's gone. And because of the convenience of Netflix and all that stuff and digital services and digital downloads, it's basically killed all that stuff off. Now, yeah, I know. At some points, you have to point out and just say, okay, the business models were not too harsh, but a lot of the places tried to charge too much, and that obviously facilitated their downfall a bit quicker. But it's a shame. So here's where we're gonna round out this video. I might take a quick pass over with possibly doing some editing. I don't know, probably not, but we'll see. I mean, the video is probably like 20. What am I looking at here? Yeah, the video is over 20 minutes long at this point, but they're kind of the best ones. The rambly, legitimate, just memory lane, nostalgic, rose-tinted glasses, whatever. They happen. They just free flow. Sure, they can be not as professional, but I never really tried to be professional anyway, so it is what it is. So let me know in the comment section below, does any of this resonate with you? Does this jive with you? Is this something you can vibe with? Do you feel any of this stuff? Have you? Were you around for this kind of thing? Do you understand what I'm talking about? Did you or anyone you know have maybe a weekly ritual, or made it a family night, or whatever it was? And do you have any funky stories as well, if you were around for this whole era? I gave off some of mine during this video, like say Resident Evil 2, Metal Gear Solid, or even Fahrenheit. I mean, they're all as insignificant as they may seem. I still remember and look back fondly on a lot of that stuff. Do you have your versions of those too? And of course, are you not only happy or sad or whatever that kind of experience is gone, but at the same time, are you one of the, let's call you the unfortunate people who are too young to be able to experience any of this, even if it's only a few times? But did you grow up in an era where video rental didn't exist? Because digital downloads and digital distribution and streaming has always been your norm. Why did I say that really loud? My voice went really loud there. But is that your norm? Is what I'm saying in this video, is this completely alien to you? Anyway, that's beside the point. Let me know all of that good stuff in the comments section below. I want to thank everyone who made it this far and stuck with me through this rambly trip down memory lane of my nostalgia-filled retro goodness, as well as the reason I do all this. But it's in the channel name, for fuck's sake. So let me know all that good stuff in the comments section below. Again, thank all of you for sticking with me on this. Let me know how I did on the video, as well as, you know, in the comment section, as well as by hitting the appropriate button, because I know this one is going to be kind of strange for many people out there. But on top of all that, why not even hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell? Granted, YouTube and whatnot sending you notifications in 2018, current year, am I right? Obligatory joke. But that's a whole other story, but at least you can say you tried, am I right? So I was going to go back into my usual outro there, but I'm just so very tired. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I will see you in the rest of the videos in my channel.